The top court of the United Nations has ordered Uganda to pay $325 million in reparations to the Democratic Republic of Congo for the terrible war between the two neighboring countries that took place in the late 1990s. On Wednesday, the court's president, U.S. Judge Joan Donoghue, said the court notes that the reparations given to the DRC for damage to persons and property reflects the loss sustained by individuals and communities as a result of Uganda's infringement of its international responsibilities. Now, in 1999, the long-running case was taken before the UN's highest court for the first time. Uganda must pay $65 million in 5 annual installments, which begin in September. Joining us to give more detail about the story is Africa analyst, advocate Sipho Mantula. A very good morning to you, advocate. Thank you so much for your time. This is a case that is rare. We usually hear European countries paying reparations to African countries, not this way around.
Jambo Africa to your viewers, and once more, this is a very important historical case. As you have said, this is very strange that we find African countries suing one another. Vis-a-vis, we know reparations have been against European countries. But taking you back, remember the genocide of 1994 in Rwanda, when this side, we were tasting freedom. We were having that ledger of freedom. But in Rwanda in Burundi, what we call the Great Lakes, there was a conflict of a genocide in 1994. Genociders, what they used to call them, Interahamwe, they fled to the eastern part of DRC Congo. So between 1996 and 1998, there was this tussle between Rwanda, Uganda, and DRC. And it appears Uganda was activated, that they were involved as early as 1998 to 2003. And when you look at this claim by DRC, it now dates back to what they have lost and the issues around the international law. But as well, they were not using international law only. There was by then the Organization of African Unity, where they were using some of the clauses to apply for reparation. Remember, this was one of the first Africa's World War I that we can call, of almost 19 countries being part of this war. We are talking of Uganda, Namibia, Zambia, all those neighboring countries around DRC. They were activated in that war.
I mean, you speak about that, all the countries involved, advocate, and we'll go to that now. Let's just quickly talk about the amount. $325 million, mixed reactions. Uganda is saying that it's a step in the right direction, but not enough. They wanted $11 billion to be exact.
Definitely, when you have the estimates on civil damages, when you have to quantify the loss, here we are talking of people who lost their life. We are talking of people who went exiled, people who lost properties, and I think Uganda missed that point because at some point in 2005 they were given an opportunity to do what we call an out-of-court settlement with DRC, because Uganda kept on coming with a counterclaim saying that even their own embassy in Kinshasa was attacked. So if you look at the amount, I think when the jury of the World Court looked at the amounts, they even counted the DRC amount, because remember, this was a lot of damage that DRC claimed, and only it was through the court that they could only quantify the 325 that you have mentioned earlier in your introduction. And if we look into it, we just say 65 million times 5 in the installment, meaning Museveni must go and look for the money in the treasury to say how is he going to now pay to the DRC government of this loss. So it is something that, like I said, very complex if you have to quantify the damages. But like I said to you, those monies will not bring back the lives of those who were killed in 1996.
Absolutely not, advocate. And to break it down, $225 million for loss of life and damage to persons, rape, displacement, as well as of about 500,000 people there, 40 million damage to property, 60 million for damage to natural resources, especially the natural resources one. You mentioned Museveni is going to have to reach into his coffers, get the money to pay, but damaging natural resources means that there is a loss of income for Uganda as well, or rather for the DRC in this.
Actually, it was for the DRC, but let me remind your viewers that Africa is still having abundance of natural resources, despite COVID-19 has come through. But what we see here, the issue that we are raising was running on my mind to say, now, how do we break down these damages? There is a loss of lives, there is people who were killed, but you have these two issues that you have mentioned that are critical: damage to property and as well to natural resources. Here we are talking about their mining industry, we are talking about their rivers, we are talking even about how they were earning money from transporting this gold and uranium. Because remember, DRC is rich with natural minerals, but it is plagued by war since 1960. Actually, since the passing of Lumumba, DRC have never tasted a gleam of peace or justice. So if you look at this amount, it is only that we don't know how Uganda will have to find it out. We don't know whether the East Africa community will have accepted this judgment, because this judgment comes from The Hague. It doesn't come from Tanzania, as we were expecting our African Court of Justice to have handled this matter. Because if you will ask me, I would have said this matter, if it was handled by an African court, they should have reached consensus on these matters. But it seems Uganda, it missed their point when they were engaging on this matter since 1999, meaning they never acted in good faith.
Yeah, they should have reached consensus quite a long time ago, Advocate, but that indeed was not the case. This war, you mentioned, had involved some almost 19 African countries in it. Nine, including Uganda and Rwanda. But Advocate, what about the other countries? Are they then not liable for any of these reparations?
No. Those countries were not brought in because both the 9 countries I've mentioned, there were proxy countries that they were either on the side of Rwanda and Uganda, and on the other side, defending DRC. And like I said to you, this is a conflict that it made South Africa to be involved in terms of mediation. Remember the inter-Congolese dialogue that we held in Sun City almost 21 years ago. But the other countries that were involved, they were not linked to these charges that were waged or litigated by DRC against Uganda. Like I said, it appears that Uganda was the main player, and Rwanda. But Rwanda, as you know, it has reached out to the DRC in many forms, but Uganda, it appears that they were activated. Until today, you know, if you are talking of the conflict in the eastern DRC, you still have both Rwanda, Uganda active in those border lines with the irregular armed groups, or what we can call the rebels in the DRC. So those other countries were left off the hook. They were never brought in by the DRC.
I mean, this comes just about 2 months after the two countries, Uganda and the DRC, have now joined forces, as you mentioned, to fight those rebels. Could this affect that relationship and that agreement between the two countries?
You know, we say it is strange, even as you know, that in the DRC there was a problem last week that one of the national security advisors of Tshisekedi was arrested. So one will have looked at two ways. Diplomatically, they will engage, but militarily as well. Defense chiefs will have to meet and say, how do we manage the strategy of dealing with the rebel groups, and at the same time, how do we address this legal process? Because this is a legal administration. This judgment is binding on the states who are part of the International Court of Justice. Because remember, Uganda and DRC, they are the member states of the United Nations. They are part of the ICJ. But the relationship, like I said, it might need a diplomatic intervention. But at the same time, I'm saying to you, Tshisekedi is worried within his inner circle, whether are they trying to overthrow him, or is there a plan to sabotage him? So it's just a matter of Museveni and Tshisekedi to engage and say, how are we dealing with this installment, which, as you have said, they have to still pay $65 million by now, as the court has ordered.
Now, will this, after the Ugandan government came out saying the ruling was unfair, first of all, what was the expectation there on their part, that would they have been absolved completely? And then the other question that I want to put to you, does this perhaps now serve as a deterrent for other countries that might want to go to war with their neighbors?
Correctly. This is a lesson of people who are becoming member states of the UN and of the ICJ court. And at the same time, as you know, the principles of international law, protection of basic human rights is very critical. The wars of aggression, the armed forces, remember that they are being charged for using a maximum force, that it seems that Rwanda was on the rapacious conflict and a war. And at the same time, I think if Uganda was able to have raised their issues from initial when the case started, maybe they should have been, the court should have been lenient on them, but I think they were stubborn to come forward, and their counterclaims did not make sense. It's the same like DRC when they went to the court and alleged on the numbers of civilians, and the court said you cannot quantify or justify that. But like I said, it is a matter that it is a lesson to our African member states when they have a conflict. You can look at the conflict in Somalia, you can look at the conflict in Ethiopia, the conflict in Sudan as well. Those are the conflicts that might be a lesson around the question of reparations, justice to the survivors and to the victims, because I think this case, it is not all about two countries. It is when justice is served to the survivors and to the victims of this conflict that has taken more than 16 years. We are talking of a long history that some of our viewers were not born. But here we are today. We are reminding them of that brutal war, that at least justice has been served to the ordinary communities that have suffered in that conflict.
In closing, Advocate Mantula, the alleged amount of civilian casualties, 180,000 by the DRC, the court saying it's between 10 to 15,000 in that. Let's talk about those victims. What does this payment do for them?
You know, it will bring closure to the case, partly because if I look at Rwanda, if I look at the DRC, having visited that country, it's a country that is still in a poverty image in terms of development, in terms of social, economic conditions. So it might elevate poverty to those families. And like I said, it may be a closure of the window of justice that they've been seeking since 1999. And at the same time, like I say, it is around the government of both countries to work on the transitional justice mechanism. How do they reconcile beyond the reparation? What is the question of living together side by side as families? Because these two countries are landlocked, they are neighbors. Ultimately, they will have to live together. And it will remind us of the Rwanda transitional process of the Gacaca courts, where families were sitting under the tree and finding each other. So like I said to you, Butle, I hope that those little reparations that have come through, they will alleviate poverty, they will bring sanity, they will harmonize both countries to move forward and build unity and peace in the Great Lakes.
Interesting times. Thank you so much for your time, Africa analyst, Advocate Sipho Mantula.